But let me take us back farther than Marcuse just so that we can understand what Marcuse did.
Sure.
Remember what toleration was at its origins. And by that, I'm talking about 16th, 17th century Europe and England in particular.
Right.
It was well understood, even by somebody like John Locke in his essay on toleration, that happens with tolerance is that things otherwise unacceptable are nevertheless put up with. That's what it means to be tolerant. You don't have to tolerate things that are acceptable, you embrace them. So there are two different words, to embrace and to tolerate. Tolerate implies unworthiness from the point of view of the person tolerating, but a calculated conscious decision not to repress it. Now, taking that as the background of what tolerance always means and what the tolerance of religious dissent meant, particularly during the era in England of the Covenanters, the Scottish dissenters and others, and the pilgrims who came to the North American shores, what tolerance meant then was people who were marginalized, who were out of the mainstream, who were unacceptable, but let's tolerate them. And so from that foundation, it grew into a broader principle of tolerance on principle, that we needed to construct society and government in such a way as not to build in institutions of repression and to allow room for dissent. And that's what we came to mean by toleration. Well, Marcuse took that formula in its original sense and turned it into a powerful weapon. So he had a kernel of truth. As you said before about others, there's always some little truth involved. The kernel of truth is that tolerance does identify marginalized, oppressed groups. Those are the ones who get tolerated. But what Marcuse did was to say that these oppressed groups are oppressed because of the oppressors. Those who are tolerating are actually not generous or liberal, they are protecting their own turf. And toleration is part of their protection. And that's how he got to the notion of repressive tolerance. Tolerance was keeping the marginalized in their place. And so we've adopted a number of terms to express what he was talking about. We refer to the disadvantaged, the outsiders, all the various things, the underprivileged, and we contrast them all with the so-called privileged, and they are the oppressors. And so he became the turning point to move from a general principle of toleration as a liberal principle to identifying it as an instrument of power in the hands of majorities, in fact, in the advanced systems, who are only interested in perpetuating their control and use tolerance to establish and maintain that control. So he informed all of the New Left as it emerged in the late 1960s into the 70s. And his most prominent of adherents, we do know, even when we don't remember Herbert Marcuse, it was Angela Davis. Angela Davis, who became, of course, part of the Black Power movement, a Black Panther, and who inspired all the movements since then that I've mentioned, such as By Any Means Necessary, BLM, and even the pro-Hamas protesters, and who is herself a dedicated revolutionary whose primary mission is to overthrow the society and culture in the United States, which she sees as fulfilling the teaching of Marcuse. So those teachings are part and parcel not of mere attitudes, but of a campaign, an orchestrated campaign that has infiltrated our educational institutions and our leadership institutions. So we ask, why are our generals in the army subject to it? Because they were trained by it. Why are our corporate CEOs subject to it? Not because they don't want to make money or they don't want to keep their institutions alive, but they were trained to think this is how to do it. And so they pursue ESG policies because that's what they were trained to do, even though they're part of this very process I'm describing. So what we have is an elaborate cultural matrix, which has now been shaped by those who want to reshape culture. And therefore, there is no way to deal with that other than to change the matrix itself. And that starts, of course, by saying, stop teaching this, stop requiring it through government, stop tell stockholders, shareholders in companies to stop putting up with it in major corporations across the board. There's no way to deal with a cultural matrix that is undermining the culture except by saying no to it.
Why do you think it has taken so long? In other words, why do you think this took off as well as it has?
Well, it took 60, 70 years. So it's been a gradual
True,
process. It's been a
but
gradual process.
it's so destructive.
It is destructive.
The outcomes are so negative even for those, or some would say especially for those it alleges to help.
Well, let me give you an answer to that I published some 20 years ago in my book, The Federalist Papers of Commentary, which I closed with an epilogue. Now, that book was written and published in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the communism, of the wall in Eastern Europe. And you know, our society was in a triumphal mood. The president at the time was celebrating a new world order and telling us that we have proved that capitalism works. And on. We kept telling ourselves we are victors and the world has changed and we have changed it. And now it's a unipolar world and we're the only power that matters. In this epilogue, I pointed out to people this was an extraordinarily perverse and out of order performance. We were overstating what had happened and failing to appreciate what was going to happen. We had claimed that we had defeated socialism, when in fact we had not defeated socialism on the arguments, on the merits. We'd only disliked it. And when you operate on the basis of liking and disliking, i.e., merely of sentiments and not persuasive arguments, you're always open to an extraordinary danger: changing sentiments. So others can come along and they can paint other fairy tale pictures that sound no less charming and that can seduce people into pathways very dangerous indeed. And that was the consequence of our triumphalism in the early 1990s. We completely laid ourselves open to being seduced by persuading ourselves there was nothing left to worry about, including socialism. But I said at the time, it has not been defeated, it has only been disliked, and we can expect it to come back. Why will it come back? Because it has one powerful weapon, which it is very hard to overcome. And that's the weapon of resentment and envy. Cultivating resentment and envy in people will lead them to embrace options that they wouldn't, in their better minds, ever embrace. And that's what we're looking at. They've been persuaded they are